Welcome, and thank you for attending the first FASD learning session for 2014-15. This year we're excited to open the season, by focusing on strengthening parent-child attachment relationships in children and parents affected by FASD. Today, Dr. Sonia Valette will discuss what we know now and summarizing the 50 years of research in the areas of attachment, child mental health, brain development, and FASD. However, before I introduce Dr. Valette, there are a few housekeeping tips. You can ask questions during the presentation by using the question and answer module on the right-hand side of your screen. A session facilitator is monitoring the questions and will pose them at the end of the session. If we aren't able to answer all the questions during the live presentation, we'll answer them via email after the session is over. It's important that you include your email address when you ask a question, otherwise we won't be able to answer it. The presenter's contact information can be found at the back of your handouts and on the final slide of the presentation. In order to receive your certificate of attendance, you must have signed in after 8:50 a.m. Evaluations for this session will be mailed to you after the session. Please fill them out and return them because we really rely on your feedback. Today's presentation and handouts will be posted for viewing and downloading on the Cross-Ministry Committee's website, fasdcmc.alberta.ca. If you experience any technical issues, please email Clayton at clayton.knoll, K-N-O-L-L, at TeachersTV, that's the wrong address. Okay. Okay. To support at cmgcanada.ca. Also, please let your local tech support know, as the problem may originate at your site. As Alberta advances with the FASD 10-year strategic plan, education and training continue to play a key role. This is our 5th year of offering the sessions and our 2nd year of delivering materials as webinars. As always, all sessions are taped and made available on the CMC website, fasd-cmc.alberta.ca, all lowercase. We are pleased with the ongoing interest and attendance in this initiative, and we appreciate the work of CASA Child, Adolescent, and Family Mental Health and the Alberta Centre for Child, Family, and Community Research for making this initiative a success. Now, I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Sonia Valette. Currently in private practice in Vancouver and Calgary, Dr. Valette is a clinical child psychologist specializing in infant and early childhood mental health and caregiver infant and child relationships. Attachments. She provides assessment and intervention services to high-risk caregivers and their infants and young children with a wide range of emotional, regulatory, developmental, and behavioral challenges, including disrupted caregiver-child attachment relationships. She's a court-appointed expert witness in matters pertaining to caregiver, infant, and child attachment relationships in Alberta, and has collaborated with professionals from a variety of systems to address developmental and mental health needs of young children who have been maltreated and placed in foster care. Dr. Valette also teaches in infant and early childhood mental health and attachment at the University of British Columbia. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Sonia Valette.
Thank you. And welcome to everyone who's joining us today. So the focus of my presentation today is on strengthening the parent-child attachment relationship in children and parents affected by FASD. This is a little bit of a roadmap in terms of what I'm hoping to cover today. As you may know, this is part of a three-part series. Okay, is that better? This is part of a three-part series on this same topic. So today we're going to talk about really sort of the core story of early childhood development. What are the key tasks of early childhood development? Talk about then risk and protective factors influencing the attachment relationship, and then what we know about attachment and FASD. So that's our roadmap for today. In terms of what is healthy early childhood development, there are a number of key tasks associated with early childhood development. Really, one of the key tasks is the child's ability to regulate their attention, their behavior, and their emotions, essentially to develop the capacity for self-regulation. A second key task is the ability to form close emotional ties with others. It's key to bear in mind that child development always takes place within the context of a relationship. Another key task of early childhood is the ability to play, to explore, and to learn. And as you can see from the previous points that I've made, early childhood development and early childhood mental health are really two sides of the same coin. One of the questions that is key for us to ask is what can derail early childhood development? We know that strong, frequent, and prolonged adversity, persistent stress, and fear without adequate adult support disrupts the developing brain and really can derail healthy child development with long-term consequences for the individual in terms of their cognitive functioning, mental health functioning, and more recently we know now in terms of their health. We know that children who experience really toxic levels of stress without adequate adult support are at risk for a number of difficulties long term, including some health difficulties. For example, we know that those children as adults are at risk for cancer, for cardiac difficulties, and a range of other medical difficulties. We also know that the lack of opportunities for playful interactions with adults also disrupts typical brain development. So what I want to present now is a model for understanding the development of a child that takes into consideration a number of different domains that impact on the child's functioning. This is the model that I use in all of the work that I do, and I encourage any professionals working with families to take the functioning in all of these domains into consideration when they're working with families. The model was initially developed by Mark Greenberg and now has been modified a bit to and now has been developed by Decline and Greenberg. So we're looking at the child's functioning as really the product of sort of a transaction or interaction of functioning in a number of different domains. So the development of the child is really the product of this sort of continuous interaction of the child and experiences produced by the parents, the family, and the social context. And we know that there can be risks in each one of those domains and protective factors in each one of those domains. We'll talk a little bit about what a risk factor is and what a protective factor is. So a risk factor for that particular child is really any experience that or factor that can increase the risk of a poor outcome or a maladaptive outcome for that child under adverse or negative circumstances. We'll talk more about some specific risk factors. One of the findings that is very concerning about risk factors for a young child or for really any of us is that risk factors accumulate or they combine in a cumulative manner. So they don't just add together, they combine really, a helpful way of thinking about it is exponentially. So a child who has 4 or more risk factors is at a 16-fold increase risk of poor outcomes versus a child who, say, has 1 risk factor. So they combine exponentially rather than in an additive manner. Protective factors are factors or experiences that reduce the risk of poor outcomes or maladaptive outcomes for the children, for a child also under conditions of risk, and also promote resiliency, meaning that children who have protective factors are able to cope with adversity and don't have as many sort of negative consequences associated with that. The good news about protective factors is they also combine in a cumulative manner. So 3 or more protective factors can contribute to early resiliency. So let's look at a little bit more at key risk and protective factors. And as we're reviewing this material, what is helpful, I think, to think about is if you're a parent or if you're a professional working with families, to be always thinking about what can we do to reduce risk and increase protective factors, right? And as a professional working with families coping with many risk factors, that's always the approach that I'm using. So using this transactional model, how can I decrease risk and increase protection, which helps really give that child the best start in life. So let's look now at this slide, sort of summarizing some key risk and protective factors. Given that I know we are wanting to also be thinking about how this applies to children who have been prenatally exposed to alcohol and also potentially parents who've been prenatally exposed to alcohol, let's be thinking about how that factor would fit into this model. So starting with the infant, some potential risk and protective factors. So it was the infant full term versus preterm. What is the temperament of the infant? Was there prenatal exposure to substances? Was there prenatal exposure to alcohol? What has the child's developmental progress been like? What is the child's health? How is the child's health unfolding? So you can see that we can have protective factors in some of those specific areas, or we could have some risk for the child. The prenatal exposure to alcohol being a key risk, and the impact that has on the child's developmental progress being key risk factors that would be most pertinent to our discussion today. Let's look at the caregiver domain. When I am working with a parent and a child, I'm always wondering about or asking questions about the parent's own attachment history. We know that, and we'll talk more about this in a moment, but we know that there's a high correspondence between the attachment history that a parent had themselves and the impact of that on their parenting. Does the parent have a history of trauma? Does the parent have a history of loss? I'm also wondering, has the parent been able to make meaning of those experiences, or does the parent have unresolved around traumatic experiences they've had or loss that they've experienced? What is the history of involvement with Child and Family Services? Is there historical involvement? Is there current involvement? How is the parent doing in terms of their well-being, their mental health? And I'm also looking at their parenting skills. How does the parent manage in terms of their sort of coping skills, their communication skills, their conflict management skills, their problem-solving skills? Again, as you can imagine, you can see risk and protective factors in each of those particular areas. And these are just some of the key risk and protective factors that I consider when I'm working with a parent and a child. And then in terms of the attachment relationship, I'm very interested in looking at how the parent and child interact. How does the parent do in terms of their cue reading skills, being able to read the child's cues and understand what the child needs? How does the parent do in terms of responding sensitively to those cues from the child? So looking at the parent skills in terms of their part of that attachment relationship, but also looking at the child. So is the child able to use this caregiver to calm down when distressed? Right? So let's imagine the child has fallen and scraped his knee, and the caregiver is available. What does the child do? Does the child turn into the caregiver for support? And if the child does turn to the caregiver for support, does the child seem to benefit from that support and calm down and return to play? And then I'm also always looking at contextual factors. Looking at the stress that is impacting on the parent, on the family. Oftentimes I also work with parents, with women prenatally, and looking at the level of stress that parent is experiencing, because we know that experiencing stress prenatally, as well as, for example, experiencing significant depression prenatally, can have a significant impact on the fetus, particularly in terms of the impact on their cortisol, which is stress hormone level, and the impact on the developing stress response system within the child, with long-term implications for that child. So I'm looking at stress. I'm looking at sort of other adversity impacting on the family. So, for example, are the parents, is the mother experiencing domestic violence? Is the child being exposed to domestic violence? Is there marital disharmony? Is the family struggling with adverse conditions associated with poverty? What are the resources the family has access to? What support is available? How socially isolated is the mother or are the parents? Is the parent participating in community activities? And again, looking at where the risk factors are and what can we do as professionals and also as parents to reduce risk, and where are the protective factors and can we increase the protective factors. Some of the families that I work with, there might be some strain in the child's relationship with the parent, but the child has quite a positive relationship with, say, a grandparent. So while I'm working with the parent to strengthen the child's relationship with them, can we involve that grandparent more effectively to, in some ways, be sort of an alternative attachment figure for the child. So always looking at reducing risk and increasing protection. So let's talk a little bit more now about what we know about attachment in general, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what we know about attachment and children with FASD. We know that attachment goes from a child to a specific caregiver and from a specific caregiver to a child. It's essentially a bi-directional relationship that goes from a parent to a specific child and a child to a specific parent. It is possible, because attachment is relationship specific, it is possible for a child to have a very positive, healthy attachment relationship with one caregiver and a problematic relationship with another. That is certainly possible. The attachment relationship is generally established between 7 and 24 months of age, and the stages in the development of the attachment relationship are strongly linked to the child's cognitive development, oftentimes the term attachment is used interchangeably with the term bonding. And I think it's helpful to distinguish between those two phenomena. I think a helpful way of thinking about bonding is that bonding goes from the parent to the child and involves his or her early love and caring for the infant. Right? So attachment is a bi-directional relationship, and bonding goes from the parent to the child. Certainly not all parents experience that feeling of bonding, but I think that's the most sort of helpful working definition of bonding. You also can, I work with many adoptive parents and foster parents as well, and this idea of bonding also applies to them. Certainly some foster parents, adoptive parents feel a strong sense of bonding with a child in their care. Again, that's not a universal experience. So let's look a little bit more now at what we know about attachment. We know that the primary caregiver plays many different roles in the life of a child. They are a caregiver, right? So the primary caregiver ensures that a child in their care has adequate nutrition, has adequate clothing, is warm, and so on. So their caregiving needs are attended to. A caregiver is also a playmate, a teacher, a person who sets limits, but very importantly, the caregiver is also an attachment figure. And those roles that the caregiver plays are organized hierarchically, with the role of the attachment figure being at the top of that hierarchy, and those other roles being at the next level in terms of the hierarchy. So the next question we might ask is, so then what is the role of the attachment figure? The attachment figure plays a key role in terms of protecting the child to ensure their survival. So there's a biological significance to the role of the attachment figure. We also know that the attachment figure is critically important in terms of the child developing self-regulation. So the ability to regulate their attention, their emotions, and their behavior. You learn that, and we all learn that within the context of a relationship. What is particularly important in terms of developing self-regulation is for a child who is potentially upset, if I've fallen and scraped my knee, to be able to interact with a caregiver who is going to read my cues well, respond sensitively, and who is calm. And essentially it is their calm brain that is going to help organize my brain so that I can learn to self-regulate. Now the next question we might ask is, well, that sounds pretty important. So how do I as a parent do that? Or how can I encourage parents I'm working with to be able to do this? And really there are 4 key processes by which a caregiver can help a child to form a secure attachment relationship with them. And this image, I think, nicely depicts a number of these. This image is from the Circle Security intervention, and so I want to acknowledge the source of this image. These images are available on the Circle of Security website, which is at circleofsecurity.net. This is from 2008, and the reference is Cooper, Hoffman, Marvin, and Powell. So I'm going to just walk you around the circle to help each one of us sort of understand the key processes by which a secure attachment figure helps a child form a secure relationship with them. So let's imagine that the caregiver is hands on the circle, right? So that represents you as the caregiver. So let's imagine that the child is calm, or the child in your care is calm and is ready to explore. So the child sees a toy that interests them, or sees a little ladybug that they want to go and investigate, and they look at your face for direction about whether or not it's okay to explore. And what they're counting on is for you to assess the situation, determine whether or not it is safe, and signal to them if that's the case. If it isn't the case, they also need you to signal to them that it's not safe to explore. But let's imagine that it is safe to explore. So they look at your face to see if it's okay. Do I have the green light to go out and explore? And I'm going to head off on a great sort of venture. So when I'm doing this, I'm using you as a secure base from which to explore. So here we describe this as the child being at the top part of the circle. So when I'm at the top part of the circle, I need you to support my exploration. So I'm out sort of exploring a little bit, say I'm 2 years of age, and I see a ladybug that interests me, and I'm going over to investigate. But when I'm out exploring, I still need you to watch over me, so I need you to keep me safe when I'm out exploring. Something could happen where I need you to help me, but just help me a little bit. Don't take over, because then I don't develop as much of a sense of sort of mastery. Enjoy with me. So let's imagine that I'm building a tower out of Lego, and I'm struggling a little bit with it, but I persist, and I have success, and I look up at you, and what is helpful for me to see is a look on your face that, yeah, I can see that you worked hard at that. Initially it was hard, but you hung in there and you were able to do it. So what's helpful for me is to hear you sort of praising my process, right? And then I also, very importantly, need you to delight in me. So let's imagine that I'm out looking at that little ladybug, and I look up at you, and what is helpful for me to see is a look on your face of just sort of, I delight in you for who you are. I accept you. I delight in you for being my sweet child. And what the research is actually showing is that delight is really sort of almost like the child having the experience of the parent delighting in them is almost like Velcro in terms of feeling a sense of worth and self-esteem, so that then when a parent praises you or a parent responds positively to an exchange with you, that then can stick on the Velcro. But the basis is the delight, right? Neurobiologically, in terms of self-esteem. So we've talked a little bit here just about the top part of the circle, and a child's need for you to be a secure base. But we also know that a child's need can change very quickly from needing you to be a secure base to needing comfort. So let's imagine the child is out exploring and a dog barks that scares the child. So suddenly their need changes from needing you to support their exploration to needing you to provide comfort. So now we describe this child as being on the bottom part of the circle, right? So I'm out exploring the ladybug, a dog barks and scares me, and so now I'm going to look at my caregiver to see if it's safe to come in, right? So we're at the bottom part of the circle, and the message that I'm sending to you is I need you to welcome my coming in. In a secure attachment relationship, the message that the child receives from the parent is, you're welcome to come in, yes. That I can see what happened, and in many cases I will even go over to you because I can see that you need my help. I can see that you need me to protect you, to comfort you, yeah, because that was frightening, to delight in you, and the delight in you here is that I accept that this is also part of the complexity of who you are. And also I know that you need me to help you organize your feelings. So I'm going to get down at your level, I'm going to sit face to face, and I'm going to say, it looks like you got scared when the dog barked. I'm here to help. We can work this out together. Right? That's critically important in terms of helping the child with self-regulation. Right? It helps the child feel understood. Empathy also helps the child stay engaged cognitively, right? Where the child can say, yeah, I feel understood. That was scary when the dog barked, but you were here to help me calm down. You are calm. You understand me. So it's going to be your calm brain that's going to help regulate and organize my dysregulation. So here I am at the bottom part of the circle, and you're functioning like a safe haven. The third part of the circle is, as I talked about, is hands on the circle. And when you're being hands on the circle, you're being a secure base, you're being a safe haven. What you're also doing is having a confident presence, right? Sending the message to the child that you can count on this relationship to make things right. That I will set limits with you when appropriate, and I'll do that in a way that's loving and kind. I know you, I accept you, and I'm committed to you. And that I'm going to be able to structure and organize the environment externally as well as interpersonally for you to be safe, right? So I'm going to be hands on the circle. And in circle of security language, we call that being bigger, stronger, wiser, and kind, right? And then the fourth aspect of forming a secure attachment with a child is to be able to repair many ruptures that occur. And there's a subsequent slide that explains this a little bit more. So I'm just going to go on to the next slide. Again, this information is from the Circle of Security website. I've done a number of years of training with the Circle of Security therapists, and they've given me permission to use some of this material in this way. So if we're sort of traveling around the circle, as I said, this is a summary of some of the points that I just made. So one of the roles that the attachment figure is playing is to be a secure base from which the child can explore, being a safe haven to which the child can return for comfort and to organize their feelings, for the caregiver to be hands on the circle, to be a secure base and a safe haven, bigger, stronger, wiser, and kind, including setting limits when necessary in a way that's loving and kind, for the child to feel the parent knows them, accepts them, and is committed to them, and repairing ruptures. So this is a drawing to, or a graphic just to show how emotional regulation or self-regulation develops. So initially, the infant's feelings are organized by the caregiver. You think of when you're providing care to an infant, the caregiver is extremely responsible for helping that child in terms of thermoregulation, noticing their cues around when they're hot, when they're cold, when they're hungry, when they're thirsty. The caregiver is really sort of organizing those experiences for the child. Then over time, the infant's feelings can be organized with the help of the caregiver. And then finally, the infant's feelings can be organized by the child's feelings can be organized by the child. So it moves in the direction of sort of co-regulation, and then in a successful secure attachment relationship, that child is able to, let's imagine a child who's had a secure attachment with one caregiver. They're in a preschool. They're now 3.5 years old. They're in a preschool environment, and someone takes a toy from them. If a child has had assistance with self-regulation, what that child is able to do is stay well-regulated and or reasonably well-regulated, and be able to do something to help to calm down. So the child might say, "That was my toy, my turn, not your turn." The child might be able to go and get the preschool teacher to ask for help, right? So the child's able to do that on their own without you present. And then this is the fourth dimension that's key in terms of helping a child form a secure attachment with you as a caregiver, and it's called repair. Because we know that there are for all parents and children, there will be many ruptures in their attachment relationships throughout the day. That is part of typical interactions between a parent and a child. It not only is it not possible, but it's not desirable for a parent to be exquisitely attuned to a child's needs at all times and to almost be reading the child's mind. What is more helpful in terms of forming a secure attachment is for the child to send a cue and for the parent to respond. For the child to send a cue and for the parent to respond. We call that the serve and return of attachment interactions. But there are times when that can become disrupted a little bit. There can also be times when the child becomes very upset. And so this image depicts circle of repair. So the message that the child is sending to the parent when they're very upset, or when there's been a breakdown or a mini rupture in the relationship between the parent and the child is saying, "Mom, Dad, Grandma, Grandpa, when I get difficult, when I'm frustrated, demanding, upset, out of control, I don't know what to do with how I'm feeling, right? These feelings are just too big for me to manage on my own. My behavior actually means that I need you to take charge. I need you to sort of take the lead here, right? I need you to be kind to me. Stay with me until we both understand this feeling that just seems too much for me to manage on my own. Help me to return to what I was doing with a new option." So what is really key in terms of repair is for the parent to be able to see the child's behavior that might be a challenging, or the parent is perceiving it as a challenging behavior. See that from an attachment point of view as the child's attempt to communicate to you that I have a need. I need you to assist me to calm down. Right? And I need you to sort of decode this behavior as indicating that that's what this behavior means. So a circle of repair, helping my child trust that our safe and secure relationship will almost always set things right. And if I'm not going to be able, as your caregiver, to help you in the moment, I'm going to be able to get other people who can, right? So you can count on me to solve this problem. I am your solution, right? And I think this is really critically important for all children, and I would say particularly for children who have some developmental difficulties and for children who have FASD, who can present, as we know, with significant difficulties, often with significant difficulties with self-regulation. What is key is for the caregiver to understand, to decode the behavior, right? To understand what underlies it. What the child is really saying is, this is just too much for me to manage on my own, and I need your assistance to reduce the sensory input that I'm being exposed to simplify the interaction, reduce the demands on me, and stay with me until we have a solution. I need you to understand that there's a poor fit here between the demands of the situation and my ability, right? It's not that I'm being non-compliant, it's that I don't have the skills to manage the situation. I think that's probably one of sort of my key points regarding, for today, regarding children with attachment and children with FASD. One of the things that I would suggest for those of you listening is to take a moment to try to describe the circle in your own words. You can take a moment to do that now, and you can also try to do that at another time. You can download that image from the Circle of Security website, which is circleofsecurity.net. It's helpful to have the image right in front of you. They also have a Word document that you can download from their website called Traveling Around the Circle that really will give you those words that I've used to describe the circle. One of the other points I want to make about the circle is that for all of us, we have a strength somewhere on the circle, but we also all have an area of relative vulnerability. And it's helpful to step back and reflect on, for all of us, to step back and reflect on where our strength might be and where our area of vulnerability might be on the circle. Because it's quite possible that that's then going to be an area where you and your child struggle. So for example, some parents have a strength at the top part of the circle in terms of supporting the child's exploration, but might really sort of struggle more at the bottom part of the circle in terms of providing comfort. Some parents might struggle more in terms of setting appropriate limits with the child. We'll talk more about that later. I spent part of my childhood in Africa, and so I've always loved this Zulu proverb. I apologize to my Zulu teacher from high school. I'm not sure I'm going to use the correct accent with this, but I'll take a stab at it. So it's umuntu, umuntu, yabantu, right? Which is a person is a person through other persons, right? Or another way of translating that is we are people through other people, which I think is just a beautiful quote. If we bear in mind that the children in our care or the children we're working with are saying to the parent, pick me, choose me, love me, right? The child has this, irresistible desire to be irresistibly desired, right? And similarly, as caregivers, we have an irresistible desire to irresistibly desire a child in our care. This is another, I think, beautiful quote, touching quote from Diana Fosha. We each seek to know that we are held in the mind and heart of another. What is so important for a child to know is that that the child lives inside you. And similarly, what is helpful for the child is particularly in a secure attachment relationship, is for you to live inside the child, right? So that when the child is separated from you, say, for example, in a preschool, and something upsetting happens, that the child can conjure up that memory of you. The child has an internal representation of you that they carry in their heart and mind that they can conjure up and rely on for support. There's a beautiful book that nicely depicts this called The Kissing Hand that I would recommend you have a look at. It's a story about a mother raccoon and a baby raccoon and the baby raccoon is concerned about going to school and having to separate from the mother raccoon, and the mother raccoon kisses the baby's hand, the baby raccoon's hand, and says, you'll always be able to remember that I'm with you by just looking at your hand and touching the part of your hand that I kissed. Then that will help you conjure up the memory of me. Just one small point I wanted to make about this idea of that we all desire to be held in the heart and mind of another. I've in the past have provided a fair bit of consultation to preschool and kindergarten programs, and often preschool and kindergarten programs for families coping with multiple challenges. And one of the suggestions that I have often given to teachers is I want them to be thinking about a child in the class who they seem to be having some difficulty connecting with for whatever reason, right? This is a child where they might feel as if their relationship with the child doesn't seem to be having a beneficial effect on the child. A child who doesn't come to them for comfort or support. And the suggestion that I make for them, in addition to some other suggestions, but following along the lines of Diana Fosha's quote, is to ask them to take a photo of that child and take that photo home with them. And spend some time that evening or on the weekend thinking about the child. And when they come in on Monday morning, say to the child, I was thinking about you on the weekend. And I remembered that kite that you made on Friday and how hard you worked putting the tail on the kite, or whatever you would like to say to the child. And watch the look on the child's face when you do that, right? And it is essentially this, right? It is saying to the child, I carry you in my heart and mind, right, when we're not together. This is also something that certainly you can use with colleagues, in any attachment relationship. And it's interesting when you do that to watch the look on the other person's face. So just a few more things about attachment and what we know. We know that the attachment relationship is best observed when the child is under stress. So when the child is upset, when the child is ill, when the child is hurt. For those of you who are parents, but also for professionals, if we're ever sort of interacting with a child who is demonstrating these behaviors, to know that this attachment system is going to be maximally activated, and they're really at the bottom part of the circle, right? When I'm upset, when I'm ill, when I'm hurt, and what is really key is for the parent to be able to, for the most part, provide support at these times. The research has actually shown that there are many parents who might show some insensitivity to their children at some times, but are able to provide their children with support at these three critical times: when the child's upset, hurt, or ill, and that's their overall pattern. And that if we closely look at that attachment relationship, many of those children are actually securely attached to their parents, despite the fact that their parents might show some insensitivity to them at other times. We would hope that the overall pattern would be for the parent to read the child's cues well and respond sensitively, of course, and respond in that way when the child's upset, ill, or hurt. But these are really the three sort of critical times when we want the parent to be doing their best to be calm and provide the child with support. That will be key in terms of helping the child form a secure attachment with you. So we always know that the attachment relationship is always operative on sort of two levels at the same time. One is that the behavior that we can see. So we're watching a parent and child playing and interacting. That gives us information about the attachment relationship. It also gives us information about the history, right? So the parent's history will be brought into the moment. We also can see in the moment the child's own attachment history as well. So for example, I work with many children in foster care, and we can see that the child brings oftentimes a difficult history with them into that next attachment relationship, which can create some challenges. So there's always the behavior that we can see, but attachment also always operates on another level, which is an internal level that is harder to see but plays out in front of us, which we call an internal working model. So it's this cognitive, emotional representation of the attachment relationship. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. To just explain it a little bit more. If you think of your internal working model as sort of like a template that you have in your mind, that has information, expectations, and feelings about other people. So what I can expect from others. So for example, are others trustworthy? Are they accessible? Are they going to be caring? Or are they going to be unresponsive? Are they untrustworthy? Are they inaccessible? Are they uncaring? Right? So in this template that I have in my mind, I'm going to have all this information about the history of experiences that I've had with caregivers, about how trustworthy they are. But within that template, I'm also going to have a corresponding representation of me, right, of myself and my role in these relationships. Am I worthy of love? Am I capable of obtaining others' care versus unworthy of love, incapable of obtaining the care from others? And really these internal working models of attachment or this internal template that we have of attachment relationships is built up based on moment-to-moment experiences that we all have with our caregivers when we're young. We learn about who we are in those important relationships, and we learn about what we can expect from others. And over time, that starts to become woven into our personality structure. So if you imagine a young child who has had a number of disrupted attachment relationships, or potentially a child who's had disrupted attachment relationships and also has FASD, let's think for a moment about what that child's internal working model of attachment might be like. What does that child believe in terms of what he or she can expect from the adults in his life? It's possible that the child's expectation is that these relationships are going to be really hard, right? That this might not go that well, and I might not stay here, right? This might become disrupted. And then what is the message that the child has about himself or herself? The message that the child has learned about himself or herself is that, I just can't get this right. I'm not capable of receiving love. I'm not worthy. It's critically important for us to bear this in mind, because what we're wanting is for to help the child have a very positive internal working model, right, of themselves and others. But it's understandable if you think of a child who has had a number of those difficult experiences, that's then what they bring into the next relationship, right? That's their expectation of you and their expectation of themselves. So their behavior makes total sense, right? Given their history. And what is so critically important for all children, but I would say particularly for children who have FASD, is for them to have our compassion, right? To understand, for them to have the feeling of being understood by us, and that we understand that they are not choosing to be non-compliant, that they are not doing this to push our buttons, right? That part of what we're seeing is their difficult history that they have had, and what may also be happening is they don't have the skills to be able to function in keeping with our expectations, right? That we need to adjust our expectations accordingly. They need our compassion. So just, I think this is a beautiful quote from the Talmud about that internal working model or state of mind. We do not see things as they are, we see things as we are, right? So we see things through our eyes, right? So I've worked with many parents who describe a very problematic behavior that they're experiencing with a child in their care, or with a child of their own. And when I speak to other family members, they might not necessarily see the behavior the same way. When I go and do a home visit, I don't necessarily see the behavior as necessarily sort of as challenging as the parent might describe it. But yet, that's true for the parent, right? That's real for the parent. What one of the things that I often work on with parents is to sort of assist them in seeing things from the child's point of view. What is the child trying to communicate to you through this behavior? Rather than making a sort of a negative attribution about the behavior. But for all of us, we see things through our eyes, right? We see things things the way we are. The next question is about or difficulties in attachment relationships transmitted across generations. This is an area where I've done some research. I looked at attachment relationships across 3 generations. Some other researchers have done work in this area as well, Diane Benoit being one of them. And what the research shows, and my research does as well, is that there's a very high correspondence between the attachment relationship that a parent has had and how they will parent. There's about an 80 to 85% correspondence between a caregiver's own attachment history and their attachment relationship with their own child, meaning that if a caregiver had a very problematic attachment relationship with their own parents and have not become aware of the impact of that on their parenting, that really becomes a risk factor for that dyad, really placing the parent and child at risk for disrupted attachment, right? The good news is that this can change. And one of the key paths to be able to change this is for the parent to become aware of the impact of their early childhood experiences on their personality and on their parenting. Really, that awareness is like light in a dark room, right? And it's through that awareness and that capacity to step back and reflect that you have an opportunity for change or possibility for change. And we'll talk next time a little bit more about some interventions and strategies to help parents to be able to do this. And we see this also, this link between your early childhood experiences and how you parent in foster parents. And one of the interesting studies that has been done has looked at children, infants who have a history of maltreatment, who were placed in foster care when they were very young, but placed with very competent foster parents who themselves either had a secure attachment history or were really aware of the impact of their early experiences on themselves, so had an earned secure attachment history. And they tracked these children over time, and what the research found was that these children did very well, and that you actually couldn't tell the difference between these children and children who had never been maltreated and had never been in care, meaning that these children did that well. But what was key was the state of mind and the competence of the foster parent to be able to help the child form a secure attachment with them. Does that make sense? This applies to all children, but also, given that we're talking today about children with FASD, is key for those children as well. I've certainly worked with a number of children with FASD, either in care or in foster care or in the care of their parents, and what I have noticed, and a number of my colleagues have found the same, is that really the competence of their caregivers is really critically important in terms of the trajectory for that child, and that many of those children can really move on to a very positive developmental trajectory, and can, in some cases, almost do better than a child who wasn't prenatally exposed to alcohol, but who has a disorganized attachment relationship with their parent, right? The competence of the caregiver is that important in terms of the developmental trajectory of the child. We also know that we bring our attachment history with us into our adult romantic relationships as well, and interactions with friends and coworkers. As you may know, we know more now than we ever have before about the link between secure attachment, brain development, and self-regulation. In many ways, this is a very exciting time to be not only sort of working in this area, but I think to be parenting, because we know more now about these linkages, but we also know more now than we ever have before, I think, about what to do in order to strengthen secure attachment relationships and really help children to have the most positive brain development possible, to really set the stage for long-term positive outcomes for them. What Alan Shore and others have pointed out for us is that there are a couple of sort of key parts of the brain that are involved in forming this link between secure attachment, self-regulatory skills, and brain development. And the one part of the brain is the limbic system, which is the part of the brain that's responsible for affect or regulating affect. The stress response part of the brain, which is an axis within the brain. It's the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, and then part of the frontal lobe. The prefrontal cortex are critically important. And what Alan Shore and others like Dan Siegel point out is that those three parts of the brain in a child with secure attachment history become specialized and work well together. So you have this differentiation and then integration of those three key parts of the brain. What we find in terms of attachment and children who've been prenatally exposed to alcohol and have been diagnosed as having FASD is the same parts of the brain that are developed through attachment are also neurobiologically affected in individuals with FASD. So those are three parts of the brain that have also been affected by FASD, which can set the stage for a child with FASD having difficulty forming a secure attachment with a caregiver. So what often happens for children with FASD is problematic attachment then can exaggerate difficulties that these children have. So for example, difficulties with attention, with executive functioning, with planning and organization, with memory and learning, with speech and language. With their response to stress and their cortisol level, right? With depression, with empathy. Just as I mentioned earlier, that what we know is that if say an infant who has a history of maltreatment is with a caregiver who has a secure state of mind with respect to attachment, that child can do well despite that history of maltreatment. Similarly for children with FASD, that if they are with a very competent caregiver, they can do well despite this difficulty, despite this risk. But one of the key factors we need to bear in mind is that if they're in an attachment relationship that is problematic, that their difficulties are exacerbated or exaggerated. Does that make sense? So the attachment relationship can either sort of exaggerate these difficulties or exacerbate these difficulties or result in an improvement in these difficulties. It's that key, really. So we know that that in terms of attachment and FASD, this comes from Densmore's work and others, that that FASD involves a disruption in the development of some key brain attachment structures. So we know that particularly those three structures that I just mentioned, the limbic system, the stress response axis, and the prefrontal cortex. But we also know that these children are at an increased need for being able to depend on stable, ongoing nurturing attachment relationships to competent adults that care and are committed to keep them safe, right? So these children are at risk for having difficulties forming secure attachments because of the disruption in their brain architecture, but this places them at sort of more need, or indicates that they have almost more need for this a secure attachment figure than would be sort of typical, right? So they're at risk but have more need. Certainly building secure attachment relationships with children who've been prenatally exposed to alcohol and diagnosed with FASD is hard work. But it's important to bear in mind that it's not impossible to for this child to form a secure attachment with you. The Circle of Security therapists who I've worked with will often say that the first sort of 1,000 times that the parent takes steps to try to do this are the hardest, right? So it's through really repeated experiences for the child to have repeated experience with the caregiver of reading their cues, responding sensitively, that will really help change the sort of architecture of their brain. One of the difficulties we know is that that this is hard work, right? And that the caregivers can become very depleted. And this is certainly my experience working with parents of children with FASD. This is a a questionnaire that has been developed to be used to assess the sort of the strain that a caregiver is experiencing providing care to their child. These are just some of the items on this questionnaire. Providing care to this child results in my sleep being disturbed. There are a number of sort of inconveniences in my life. It's a physical strain for me. It restricts my free time, requires family adjustment, forces change in personal plans, other demands on my time, emotional adjustments, involves coping with behaviors that are very upsetting. Certainly for some parents, it can be, and I've seen this with parents, foster parents, adoptive parents, it can be very difficult to provide nurturance to a child who is extremely upset, right? That that can almost be sort of overwhelming for a parent, understandably. So just coping with these really sort of challenging behaviors. For example, if a child is aggressive toward you, if a child is aggressive toward another child, a child is engaging in high-risk behaviors where the child's safety is at risk, certainly this can become stressful. This can cause financial strain, can overwhelm you. What the research has shown when this type of questionnaire is used with parents who are parenting a child with FASD, that on average their score is very elevated. And elevated enough to indicate that this experience could cause difficulties for them in terms of their health, their physical health, as well as certainly their ability to cope. The average score is very elevated. So I think it's important for parents who are parenting a child with FASD to be, as closely as possible, sort of monitoring their strain, and also for professionals providing support to these families to be assisting the parents in doing this as well. And again, let's look at where the risk is, see what risk we can reduce in terms of the strain that the parent is experiencing, and where can we increase protection, right? Because what is critically important as well, and we're going to talk about this more next time, is in order to be able to effectively help a child to self-regulate, you have to be calm. Right? If a parent is coping with so many challenges and experiencing so much strain, potentially also experiencing depression as a result of that, their coping resources are very maxed out. And it might be difficult, understandably, for a parent to, for the most part, be able to stay calm to help a child calm down. So it's important for parents to be tracking that, and professionals working with them as well. We also know that, again, this is a follow-up to the previous slides on brain development. We know that from Bruce Perry's work and work by other neuroscientists that trauma and neglectful experiences during childhood also have a significant impact on brain development. And particularly those three parts of the brain that I just mentioned. The limbic system, which is the part of the brain that helps you cope with emotion. Particularly, there's a particular part of the limbic system called the amygdala, which is the part of your limbic system that helps you manage your fear response. The part of your brain that helps you cope with stress, your stress response axis, which is the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. So it involves actually several parts of the brain. And then your frontal lobe, in particular that prefrontal cortex. Again, what we know is for children with secure attachment histories who don't have a history of trauma or neglect or maltreatment, that those three parts of the brain are specialized and work well together. That's essentially the definition of health, right? If you think of the definition of health, say within a family or within any system, it's where people have sort of specialized roles and work well together. That's also the definition of physical health, right? Where your organs each have a specialized function and they all work well together. And we also know that certainly there are many children who have experienced abuse, trauma, or neglect, And certainly then that can also understandably apply to children who have FASD. And you can see that how that would then also be just a significant additional risk factor for a child who already is at significant risk for disrupted attachment, right? So it's important for, again, a parent who is parenting a child with FASD to understand the impact that these experiences the child has had on the child's functioning. And again, for us to parent a child with, all children, but a child with FASD with compassion, understanding that this behavior, the behavior that the child is engaging in makes total sense, makes perfect sense given the child's history and given the impact of that child's history on their brain development and functioning. But the question is then, what can we do to help support the child and move the child onto a different developmental trajectory? And the good news is there are many things that we can do. Just a couple of other key findings in this area in terms of attachment. We know now that there are a number of factors that can also disrupt the parent's capacity to be able to help the child form a secure attachment with that child. And one can be if the parent is really grieving having received a diagnosis for a child. So if the parent has unresolved trauma around receiving a diagnosis for the child. So, for example, I've worked with many parents who have a child who has been diagnosed with a medical difficulty or a developmental difficulty or FASD. And what the research is showing is that there's a percentage of parents who experience real sort of unresolve around that experience and that diagnosis, particularly receiving that diagnosis, and that can actually interfere with the attachment relationship. One other point I wanted to make as well, I don't have a slide about this, but the research also shows that for some parents who have had a child born prematurely, that can also be a traumatic experience for parents. The child is born, just too soon, and that can also set the stage in some cases for the attachment relationship being, for there to be some difficulties in terms of that caregiver helping the child to form a secure attachment with them. One of the difficulties that's an additional factor for those parents is that children who are born preterm often have difficulties sending clear cues or clear signals. This can also apply to children with FASD. So I just wanted to also mention that finding. So just I want to talk a little bit about different patterns of attachment. I won't go into too much detail about this, but we know that there are a number of different sort of patterns of attachment. You have a group of children, about 60% of typical children in a middle class sample would be securely attached, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment. That percentage would be lower in a high-risk population. Then we have about 20% of those children would be avoidant. I'll tell you more about that population in a moment. 10% would be ambivalent resistant, and a certain percentage of those children would have disorganized attachment, meaning they don't really have a coherent strategy for coping with distress. And what the research shows, if you look at attachment relationships cross-culturally, is that these percentages might vary a little bit from culture to culture, but what the research shows is that there is a form of secure attachment in every culture. But what the form that it takes varies depending a little bit on what the culture values. So in a secure attachment, what happens is the child is able to use the parent effectively around the circle. The child sends clear and direct signals in terms of seeking out the support of the parent. So when the parent is there and is available, the child will seek them out, and they benefit from the support that the caregiver provides, right? So they're effective at using the caregiver as a safe haven for soothing and as a secure base from which to explore, right? So they can effectively go around the circle with that caregiver. Certainly there will be many ruptures in their interactions over time, but for the most part, this works fairly smoothly. And what we see with these caregivers is really sort of a consistent pattern of being able to read the child's cues, respond sensitively, and be emotionally in tune with the child and support the child around the circle. And in the secure attachment relationship, there's a good balance between focusing on the relationship and focusing on the environment. Caregivers who have a secure attachment, whose children have secure attachments with them, are also good at really sort of reading the child's cues, figuring out what the child's need is, and responding to that need. So, for example, if the child comes in for comfort at the bottom part of the circle, the caregiver is able to provide the child with comfort. That comfort is effective, and they wait for a cue from the child to indicate for a cue from the child to indicate that the child is ready to explore. We call that the full charge indicator wiggle, right? So the caregiver picks up the child, is providing the child with comfort, the child benefits from that comfort, and then the child starts to sort of do the full charge indicator wiggle, which is something a little bit like that, which indicates I'm ready to explore. And caregivers whose children have secure attachments with them are good at waiting for that cue, right, and then allowing the child to go off on another great adventure. Some caregivers have a tendency to put the child down too soon. Other caregivers have a tendency to hold on to the child for too long, right, and they miss that cue, that full charge indicator wiggle, right? So what we see in this dyad is, or in a parent and child where there's a secure attachment, is a good balance between relying on self and relying on others, right? I learn as a child that there are others in my world that I can rely on for support, but I can also rely on myself. We call this, what these children experience is being with. Right? At the heart of developing a secure attachment is the knowledge that my caregiver is emotionally available to be with me during times of need, right? That my caregiver will stay present with me if I'm feeling sad, if I'm feeling lonely, if I'm feeling frustrated, if I'm feeling angry, if I'm feeling ashamed, right? That my caregiver will be able to be with me during times of need. And just want to summarize a little bit of the research that is now available on the long-term outcomes of children who have secure attachments with their caregivers. What the research shows is that one of the key outcomes for these children is the ability to self-regulate. Right? And we see this in children who have FASD, but who are in a secure attachment with their caregiver. This is one of the key sort of building blocks that we see in those children is an improved capacity to self-regulate. And self-regulation is such a key building block for development. It helps you to have a solid foundation if you're thinking of development as a house, right? Self-regulation is the foundation that needs to be solid. We certainly can see this in children who have FASD, who have a secure attachment with their caregiver. If they have a disrupted attachment with their caregiver, we see this negative impact on self-regulation. So the ability to regulate emotions, attention, and behavior, we see higher self-esteem in children with secure attachment. What we also see in these children is the curiosity and the ability to explore. What we see is that they can approach problem-solving tasks with more persistence and more positively. The secure attachment relationship really helps set the stage for learning. So we see that the child is able to sort of achieve their potential cognitively. It also helps in terms of language competence. So can you see how the secure attachment relationship really is at the core? It's sort of the center of the quilt, so to speak, in terms of development. It is, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's important to consider or take into consideration those other factors. So the characteristics that the child brings, the parenting, contextual factors, but the attachment relationship within the context of those other variables is really key in terms of long-term outcomes for the child. We also know that children with secure attachment relationships with their caregivers can achieve their potential in terms of their capacity to relate to others. We see more empathy in these children. They're more cooperative, resilient, they can cope with adversity, more competent in relationships. And also what we see is that having a secure attachment with your caregivers helps set the stage for you to be a competent parent yourself, right? Remember that intergenerational transmission of attachment experiences. We also see in these children a resilience, an optimistic outlook, and really critically importantly, children who have a secure attachment with their caregiver, despite any other difficulty that they have, learn to fear danger. What those children learn is that my caregiver is safe, and I'm going to fear danger, right? I don't fear my caregiver, right? I'm not going to confuse the two of those. I'm going to be able to distinguish between what is safe and what is dangerous. In my experience, working with many families coping with multiple challenges, including families that were homeless, coping with homelessness and coping with mental health difficulties and difficulties with substance use. I found with many, when I learned more about many of those parents, for many of them, every potentially secure attachment figure or secure attachment relationship was disrupted or was abusive. And I found for many of those parents, this was a central difficulty for them, was knowing the difference between what was safe and what was dangerous for them and for their children. So you can see how well these children do, so you can understand why it's so critically important for all children to have a secure attachment relationship with their parents. We also know that about 40% of children have an insecure attachment with their parents. And what happens for these parent-child dyads is there seems, for a variety of reasons, seems to be difficulty in terms of the dance between the child sort of signaling their attachment needs and the parent being able to respond. For some reason, this seems to be challenging, that serve and return in the attachment relationship seems to be challenging. And what it results in is anxiety on the part of the child. And under these circumstances, children do one of a few things. One is that you can really, if I feel that this dance of attunement between myself and my caregiver is disrupted, one of the things I can do is I can really turn the volume down on my needs, right? And make it seem as if I can function on my own. Another thing that I can do is I can really sort of turn the volume up on my attachment needs to try to sort of pull in this caregiver, so I can overactivate my attachment system. Another form that this can take is where my caregiver has frightened me at some point, sometimes persistently, and the experience that I'm having is the person I ought to be able to go to for support has also frightened me. So, I'm just little, and I really am feeling my distress without a solution. So we'll talk a little bit more about these patterns. So what these children are experiencing who have insecure attachments with their caregivers is the experience of being without, right, rather than being with. So at the heart of developing an insecure attachment is the knowledge that my caregiver is emotionally unavailable to be with me during times of need. Right? I'm alone. So for some dyads, for some parent-child pairs, the difficulty is more at the bottom part of the circle. Right, and again, this is an image from the Circle of Security website and from the 2000 Cooper, Hoffman, Marvin, and Powell reference. And what happens here is, imagine, going back to the example I talked about earlier, the child who has fallen and scraped her knee or his knee and wants to come in for support. So the child is saying to the parent, I need you to welcome my coming into you, but for some reason that seems to make us uncomfortable, right? I don't see you sort of welcoming me in. So, I've sort of learned that what I need to do is really sort of turn the volume down on this need to have you function as a safe haven. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of act like I need to explore or be distant. So I fell, I scraped my knee. I would really like to reach out to you for support, but I know that makes us uncomfortable, so I'm just going to sort of pretend that I can just, cope with this on my own and just play with this toy by myself, right? So, and we call these children, if they undergo a proper sort of formal assessment, and would be classified as avoidant, having an avoidant form of attachment. So what the child has learned is that attachment, emotional or physical closeness, or needing comfort is for some reason unacceptable by the parent and just isn't safe. So what they learn to do is keep their attachment behaviors sort of really dampened, turn the volume down, and they act like they need to explore. I remember working with one foster mom and a little boy who was in her care, and when he would become upset, he would run to his bedroom and hide under the bed. And she assumed that, she told me that she just assumed that was what he preferred in terms of sort of just taking care of, calming down on his own. And so she would, and her behavior made sense, she would understandably let him go and do that. But the truth was that little guy was at the bottom part of the circle needing support, but he didn't look as if he did, right? He wasn't cueing clearly about that at all, and actually he was sort of miscuing her, right? Not sending a clear cue about his need. And so what I encouraged her to do was to respond as if the need was there, even though the cue was not clear. And if anything, actually the cue that the child was sending to the foster parent was sort of the opposite of what he needed. This is often what can happen with children with insecure attachment, and often what can happen with children with FASD, right? Where they do not send clear cues about their need. If you also then have a child who has an insecure attachment, disrupted attachment history, who may have experienced traumatic experiences, and also has FASD, that child's going to be at even more sort of risk in terms of having difficulty sending clear cues. The good news is that if the caregiver responds as if the need is there, and if that's overall your pattern, that you have to understand that impacts on the child's brain development. When you do that as a caregiver, you're literally touching those three parts of the brain, that limbic system, the stress response system, the prefrontal cortex, to help them become differentiated and working well together. You're literally helping that child to develop a different brain, and new pathways can be formed within the brain. And what has happened with these caregivers, for some reason these caregivers are uncomfortable providing comfort, emotional or physical closeness. They can be rejecting and neglecting or neglectful of the children. There's generally sort of a fairly consistent pattern in these caregivers of just having discomfort providing the child with support at the bottom part of the circle. Fairly consistent pattern around that. Sometimes those parents are more comfortable at the top part of the circle, though, encouraging the child's exploration, right? So if a child comes in for comfort, what this type of parent might be inclined to do is redirect the child to a toy, right? So the child has fallen, scraped his knee, and comes in wanting comfort, and the parent redirects them to a toy rather than themselves. Does that make sense? So the focus on the top part of the circle. So what this type of parent is really encouraging the child is to over-rely on themselves and not to rely on me, right? Because that makes us uncomfortable. Then you have another set of parents where the difficulty is more at the top part of the circle. So here the child is saying to the parent, I'm interested in having a look at that toy, or is that a little worm over there? Or I want to go smell that flower. Or is that a little dog? So looking up to the parent to say, do you support my exploration? I'm calm and I want to sort of go on a little adventure. I'm not going to go far, just over there. And for some reason for this dyad, or this parent-child pair, that makes the parent uncomfortable, right? And so when the child looks up at the parent for a signal about whether or not it's okay to go to explore, the message that they receive from the parent is, no, I think you better stay close, right? It's not safe to go. And so then what often this child will do, if that's part of a repeated pattern with the parent, is the child will then sort of miscue the parent and act like they need to stay close. Oftentimes this child might even start to cry and sort of, because what they've learned is this is what I need to do to stay connected to you. All children are very good at figuring out what I need to do and what I need to not do to stay connected to you, right? And that's what they will do, right? Because it's adaptive. It's about their survival, right? This type of child often then sort of stays close to the parent, can be quite clingy, and this, as you can imagine, over time, this has a significant impact on this child's learning, right, and curiosity, because they tend to stay upset or are upset, calm down a bit, upset and calm down a bit, but stay close to the parent. The message that the parent is sort of often sending to the child here is that if you go out to explore, I will feel abandoned. I'll be alone, right? So I need you to stay close to provide me with support. So in this type of a parent-child pair that would be classified could be classified as having what we call ambivalent resistant attachment. And here the child learns that exploration and separation are not safe, right? For my dad and I, or for my mom and I, it's not safe for me to go to the top part of the circle. So I'm going to hold back my exploratory behavior, and I'm going to act like I need closeness, comfort, and protection, even though actually I was calm for a moment and was interested in that little worm, right? But I could see that my mom or dad wasn't comfortable with me exploring, so I'm going to act like I need them, even though in that moment I didn't. There's going to be an over-focus on the relationship and an under-focus on exploration in the environment. What the research shows is happening in this parent-child pair is this type of parent, for the most part, is being inconsistently available. Often uncomfortable with separation, and sort of needs the child to need them. So I want you to sort of stay close. I want to feel needed by you. But then oftentimes this parent then sort of feels overwhelmed by the child's very sort of high needs, right? So it's like, I need you to be close. I need you to need me. But I don't want to be responsible for you because your needs feel pretty overwhelming, right? So what the child has learned is that I need to really turn the volume up on my upset to pull in this caregiver that's pretty inconsistently available. Does that make sense? And so what we see with this pair, what we see with this pair is an over-reliance on others and less of a reliance on self. What we're striving for is that balance, right, between autonomy or independence, relying on myself, and relatedness, the ability to rely on others, right? What is healthy for children is to be able to sort of strike a balance between the two and to know when I should rely on myself and when I can rely on others. Then we also have a group of children whose parents really struggle to be sort of hands on the circle, right? And if you're struggling to have a confident presence, to be bigger, stronger, wiser, and kind, you're going to be struggling sort of all around the circle. And you can see that the child is then doesn't have a solution, right? It's my distress without a solution. I don't really have anyone, my go-to person supporting my exploration. I don't have my go-to person providing comfort. I don't have my go-to person having a confident presence and keeping me safe, right? So I have distress without a solution, right? So the child, the message that the child is sending to the parent is I need you around the circle, but when you are mean, when you're too harsh with me, when you're weak, when you don't set appropriate limits with me, when you're gone, when you just don't have hands on the circle, I have no one to turn to and I just don't know what to do. And the bottom part of the slide is when we are mean, weak, or gone, our children feel afraid of the person they most need to turn to. When this happens repeatedly, our children learn to not turn to us, teachers, and other safe adults for help. So what these children experience is what we call sort of an irresolvable paradox, right? Where the person you ought to be able to go to for support is also a source of fear, right? And so I'm 18 months old, I'm 2 years old, and I'm upset, and I'm wanting to approach my caregiver, but I remember that there have been times when I feel afraid with you. There are times also that child might think there are times when you seem afraid of me, right? And that's frightening for me, right? And this type of child really then struggles to form a coherent strategy for coping with distress. So what has happened for these children? Raised in a context of fear, and they just don't have a coherent strategy for coping with distress. What they tend to do is, rather than being able to engage in flight or that fight or flight, the fight or flight isn't operative for these children, because those don't seem to be options, so what they tend to do is freeze. They're very at risk for dissociation, which is where the child really psychologically just sort of disconnects from reality in order to cope, right? That can be fleeting. I've seen dissociation in children as young as 10 months of age, but if that becomes a pattern of coping that was adapted when you're little, that's highly problematic for the child long term. So what do we see in these caregivers of children with disorganized attachment? What we can see a couple of different sort of patterns. At times what we see is caregivers who can be quite sort of hostile and intrusive with this type of child, and that can be frightening for the child. There are also some caregivers who seem very sort of helpless and withdrawn, and who seem frightened of the child. And both of those experiences are frightening for the child. Right? I've also worked with parents who sort of vacillate between the two. There are times when they can seem quite sort of helpless and withdrawn, and then when they become very frustrated with the child, then can intervene in a way that is harsh and frightening for the child, harsh and intrusive. So you can sort of flip back and forth between the two, all of which is frightening for the child. Now, in terms of outcomes, one of the reasons we're so worried about children who have this form of disorganized attachment, who fear their caregiver, is because these children are really at risk for challenging outcomes. So in infancy, we know that they don't have a coherent strategy for coping with distress. They often show really kind of contradictory attachment behaviors when they're distressed. So they might, for example, approach their caregiver, but approach them walking backwards. Right? So this sort of almost like an approach avoidance pattern, or approach the caregiver but making sort of circular movements toward the caregiver. They don't show sort of a clear signal in terms of needing the caregiver. They show approach but apprehension, right? They can also dissociate. During the toddler years, what we often see in these children, understandably, is poor social skills, difficulties with aggression. What we see during the preschool and school age years is these children, if you can imagine, these are children who've experienced a caregiver as a source of fear, haven't really been able to develop coping strategies. So they develop strategies, what we call strategies of desperation, during these preschool and kindergarten years. And if you look closely at the behavior, what underlies the behavior that these children engage in is it's an attempt to control caregivers, right? They can often be quite punitive and defiant with their caregivers, which is a way to result in a caregiver interacting with you in quite a predictable way. Or they can be like caregivers, almost functioning like little parents, where there's role reversal in the relationship. So it's important for us to, when we're looking at the behavior of a child, to again sort of understand the purpose of the behavior. Oftentimes for a caregiver, this can be very frustrating if a child, understandably frustrating if a child is acting out a great deal, a child is aggressive. In, say, a foster home, the child might be aggressive toward another child, or in a home, and aggressive toward a younger child that is resulting in the younger child being injured. Of course, that behavior needs to be addressed, but what is important for us is to understand what's underlying that, right? Is this really an attempt on the part of the child to result in us being sort of more predictable, right? Is this potentially a form of disorganized attachment? Not that we're wanting to be diagnosing children or classifying children, but it's important to understand the function of the behavior. What is the underlying need that is being met? So when a child is aggressive, what typically happens? Aggression organizes adults, right? If a 4-year-old pushes a 2-year-old in your home, or in the home of a family you're working with, generally that results in a caregiver stepping up. sometimes in a way that is problematic for the relationship. But it's aggression is very organizing. So whenever I see aggression in a dyad, in a child, I always sort of wonder about the function it's serving. Right? Again, it's important for us to have a compassionate view toward children. So if we follow children who have this type of very difficult attachment history into adolescence and adulthood, what we see is, again, sort of an increasing problems around aggression, difficulty calming after stressful events, because as you can imagine, these children, one of the key things that these children have had difficulty learning is learning how to self-regulate, right? Because the person they ought to be able to go to for support to help them with self-regulate frightened them. What we see is ongoing dissociation, so that tendency to disconnect from reality as a way to cope. Lower reflective functioning, so the capacity to step back and reflect. Academic difficulties, difficulties with self-esteem, rejection by peers, and what we tend to see is really sort of underachievement in the work setting. So as you can imagine, if you are parenting a child who has FASD, but potentially also has a disrupted attachment relationship with you, you can see how that adds additional complexity for that child in terms of difficulty coping and also the impact on the brain functioning of the child, particularly children who have this more sort of disorganized form of attachment. So just a quick sort of summary of sort of some of the key things that children with different forms of attachment learn. So children with secure attachment learn to fear danger, right? So I learned that my caregiver is safe, and my go-to people are safe, and something that sort of is dangerous is not safe, and I learned the difference between the two. Avoidant children, or children with avoidant attachment, learn to fear being close, right? They and their parents struggle more at the bottom part of the circle. Children with that ambivalent resistant attachment fear separation. So I'm wanting to go and explore, but I'm that seems to make us uncomfortable, so I don't go and separate. And children with disorganized attachment fear their caregiver. And as you can see, that puts those children at such sort of significant risk for poor outcomes. The good news is that there are a number of things that we can do to address difficulties in attachment relationships. We're going to talk more about that during our subsequent sessions. There are a few slides at the end of this presentation that are some strategies that I thought would be helpful to make available to those of you participating right now, but I'm only going to address those during the next session. Okay, so I'll give you a little bit of a sneak preview. I think this is a beautiful poem that I think applies to all of us in terms of our life journey, and really emphasizes the importance of being able to sort of step back and reflect. I walk down the street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I'm lost. I'm helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend that I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place, but it isn't my fault. It still takes me a long time to get out. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it is there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. I get out immediately, walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. I walk down another street. I think this, as I said, I think this can apply to all of us in terms of our journey, and for parents that we're working with to be able to help them to see that there are things that they can do, steps that they can actively take to change their lives, to parent differently, and that it's really sort of step by step. That yes, it's difficult work, yes, it's hard work, but really they with the support of others can make changes to be able to walk around the hole and then choose a different street. So this is a beautiful poem by Portia Nelson. So what I would encourage those of you watching this to do is to think a little bit about some parents and children you know. It could be a parent and child you're working with. It could be yourself and your child, and any parent-child pair that you know. And see if you can sort of get a little bit of a sense of what the pattern might be in that relationship. And it's not that we're going to be sort of categorizing any parent-child pairs, because that's a formal process, involves an attachment assessment. But it's helpful to be thinking about, gee, I'm wondering where this parent and child's strengths are around the circle. Where are the sort of difficulties? This is a child who tends to stay close to the parent and seems to have difficulty exploring and seems to have this is a child who seems to have quite a bit of difficulty seeking out the parent for support even when the parent is there. So then sort of try to describe the parents and vulnerabilities around the circle. Those that you could be doing it for yourself. You could be considering it for another parent-child dyad. And then try to think about other factors that might be playing a role. Is this how this relationship always was? Has this relationship changed? Is the parent and child, are the parent and child under a great deal of stress that seems to have impacted on the relationship? Has the parent experienced a significant loss? For example, a parent who's recently lost her own parent, or a parent lost his own parent, that could be impacting on their parenting. Is this a change from how this used to be? Consider other sort of possible factors that could be impacting on the interaction. If we're looking at the child, how clear are the child's signals? How well does the child send sort of cues to the parent about what they need? So be thinking about all of those sort of different factors as you think about a parent and a child. Just a few strategies. We're going to end today with just a few strategies to strengthen the attachment relationship for all parents and children. Then, as I said, next time we're going to talk much more about specifically how to apply this to parents and children, particularly where the child has FASD, but also for parents themselves who have FASD. So really what is key, I think, for all of us in our lives is to become aware of our strengths and vulnerabilities, and in terms of parenting, around the circle. So is my strength in terms of supporting my child's exploration? Is my strength in terms of providing my child with comfort? How do I do in terms of that sort of hands on the circle? Do I have a confident presence? Because if I don't have a confident presence, I might not realize this, but I might actually be frightening my child by not being confident, not having confident presence, by not being their go-to person. Or for example, if when my child is or the child in my care is very upset and I become very upset, I didn't realize, but I think that actually might be frightening for my child, right? When to see me that upset and to see me really struggling to calm them down. Can you imagine being 2 years old and having that experience of being able to frighten your caregiver? Right? How disorienting that would be for a child. How do I do in terms of being able to organize my child's feelings? How comfortable am I with that? Am I able to say, you look happy, when you stacked your blocks, or you look surprised when that toy opened unexpectedly, or it looks like you're feeling frustrated because your toy is broken. Looks like you got scared when the dog barked. I'm here to help. We can work this out together. How comfortable are you doing that? What is your ease with that? And how comfortable are you in terms of repairing ruptures that occur in the relationship between you and the child? How comfortable are you repairing ruptures in relationships in your life in general? with your sister, with your brother, with a coworker. Just know that we can, if we choose to, can repair ruptures in all of those relationships. To be able to go back to a colleague on Monday morning and say to them, I spent a little bit of time on the weekend thinking about that conversation that we had on Friday, and I'm not sure that I was listening as well to you as I wished I had been, I'm not sure that I was listening, and I don't think I was communicating very effectively. So I'm just wondering if we could revisit that again, and I apologize for my role in that. Repair is incredibly powerful. Repair does a couple of things. It teaches a child. And particularly in the parent-child attachment relationship, it teaches the child that they can trust you, right? That, you understood how I was feeling, and you're making a point of coming back. It also teaches a child that something positive can come from something negative, and that teaches you about being optimistic, helps you to be optimistic that, a positive outcome can come from this, right? This is another, I think, very helpful image from the Circle of Security website that we want for the parents and children we're working with, but also for all of us to have a secure attachment, for the child to have a secure attachment with the parent. So I want that, but wanting that is not what leads to that, right? Wanting that is not going to be enough. Really, what we all need to be able to do is start with a map, right? I need sort of a roadmap of how to do this. I need to be able to clearly understand my child's needs, right? And for a child with FASD, the parents could benefit from potentially from some additional support to be able to understand the child's cues and still be able to respond sensitively, because it might be difficult at times to read the child's cues easily, right? So I need a map I can understand to be able to understand my child's needs. And then what I have to be able to do, and I think Circle Security and other interventions as well offer a really sort of helpful map, like a road map, right? And then what I need to do is I need to sort of step back and reflect and sort of watch myself and my child. And I can do that myself, or I can do that with a support worker who's providing me with some support to be able to see where my strengths are around the circle, see that my child does need me, see that when I provide support immediately and in a sensitive way, my child responds well, right? I need to be able to sort of step back and reflect, and then I need to step back and talk about what I'm doing and maybe not yet doing to meet my child's needs. And that is the path to secure attachment, right? So really, and I would add to that what is helpful for all of us is to step back and maybe glance back and consider the impact that some of your early childhood experiences have had on shaping your personality and influencing your parenting. To be able to reflect on that as well, that, I'm sort of wondering if I might have really high expectations for my child because, my parents had really high expectations of me. And I'm wondering if that is really interfering with my child's ability to form a secure attachment with me. This is another image from Circle of Security that I think is very helpful. They tried to put in sort of 25 words or less, almost everything you need to know about promoting security. So almost everything I need to know about promoting security in 25 words or less. So always be bigger, stronger, wiser, and kind, right? So be hands on the circle, right? Whenever possible, follow your child's need. So what is my child's need on the circle, right? Is my child, and then whenever necessary, take charge, right? So is my child needing me to support his exploration? If he is, what is his need on the top part of the circle? Is my child needing comfort? Is he at the bottom part of the circle? What does he need? Does he need me to organize his feelings? Is this a take charge moment, right? When I need to be the one to lead, right? And to, if my child is climbing on the table and could potentially hurt himself, I need to say, feet on the ground, feet on the floor, not safe, and to do that in a way that's firm but still loving, right? And so that is where we're going to end for today. Let me do just a couple more slides here, and then I'll take some questions. I did want to end with just a few strategies for professionals working with caregivers of a child with FASD. This has been sort of my experience, and I've worked with a number of different psychologists who have worked a great deal with families affected by FASD. What seems to be helpful is to be really sort of like a roll-up-your-sleeves collaborator, right? And really figuring out how best to help families and children. Really what the parents are needing to experience is us being sort of hands-on, their hands on the circle, right? We are their go-to people in terms of, let's figure this out, and I'm going to hang in here until we figure this out, right? What's helpful is to design everyday routines of interaction and support at home and school that are consistent with the child's challenges, but also consistent with the child's strengths, right? We need to make adjustments to take into consideration the child's profile of strengths and difficulties. And it's important to bear in mind that what we might be interpreting as non-compliance or the child being uncooperative, in many cases with children with FASD is more that, this is beyond my ability, right? This is more, I sort of can't do this rather than I won't do this, right? It's important for us to bear that in mind. Help children to set goals consistent with their dreams, and have caregivers and supporters act as coaches to help them accomplish what they can, right? And it's important for all of us to bear in mind that magic is happening. Right, so through those moment-to-moment experiences, for a child with FASD to have moment-to-moment experiences with a caregiver, where the caregiver is trying to read their cues well, respond sensitively, you have to understand the impact that has on brain development, and in terms of forming new circuitry. And then this is just a little sheet that I often use when I'm working with parents and children to help me understand the family in terms of strengths, so where their strengths are, where the protective factors in each of those 4 domains we talked about at the beginning, where are the risk factors, and what can be done, right? What suggestions can I provide? Are there other things that can be provided in terms of providing the family with support? Is the parent very socially isolated? Is the parent wanting additional support? I think this is very helpful. I've also often used this on a team as well, so we're all sort of working together with the parents on the same sheet or on the same page. I'd like to end just with this quote that by E.E. Cummings that I think nicely captures some of the essence of attachment. We do not believe in ourselves until someone reveals that deep inside us is something valuable, worth listening to, worthy of our trust, sacred to our touch. Once we believe in ourselves, we can risk curiosity, wonder, spontaneous delight, or any experience that reveals the human spirit. So once we, feel known, accepted, known, and feel that our caregivers are committed to us, it really then makes it possible for us to go on a great adventure, go to the top part of the circle. So thank you, and I'll just end with there's my email address if anyone's wanting to contact me, and we have a little bit of time left for questions. And if I'm not able to answer all the questions now, I can answer them by email.
So the majority of the questions we received were actually technical questions. Did anybody have any further questions for Sonia regarding the content of her presentation? And we'll address the technical questions shortly after.
Okay. While we're waiting for some of those to come in, Sonia, I have a question. You did a good job of demonstrating that there's a transgenerational pattern in attachments. I guess I should be using this. So there's a transgenerational pattern in attachments. Right. And you also talked about the possibility of encouraging or using a safe relationship in a family if the child doesn't appear to be safe with the parent. So, and you used as an example the grandma. Now, given that there is a transgenerational pattern, a likelihood of a transgenerational pattern, then what that suggests is that the parent-grandparent relationship is not strong, or the attachment there could not be strong. And so what is that intervention going to do to that relationship?
Right.
And then what in turn is that going to do to the parent and the parent's ability to attach to the child? I think that's an important dynamic to factor into the intervention that people plan
That's right.
with families. So I wonder if you could comment on that.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question, and in my experience, a very common way that plays out, right? So there's several sort of factors to consider. One is certainly how that is handled, right? How the professionals involved provide the parent with support around that. I can think of one parent, child, and grandparent where we were able to do this quite effectively. But we started with working with the parent and the child, I was the key therapist involved, but there were other support workers involved as well. And what I noticed was that the child did seem to have a good relationship with the grandparent. She was often at the home when I was doing visits, but I did notice strain in the relationship between the mom and her mother. What was often difficult was during the home visits, the child would often seek the grandmother out rather than the mother. So what I did through my work with the mother was to just begin exploring the possibility of involving the grandmother more, and being sensitive to the possibility, and that this did occur in this situation, that she initially wasn't receptive to that idea, right? Because she herself didn't have a positive relationship with her mother. But to be able to, over time, and you also have to bear in mind that during this process, I'm working closely with the mother to help strengthen the child's attachment relationship with her. But over time, to be able to continue to explore that, to also be able to strengthen the relationship, if possible, between the mother and the daughter, right? And to help the mother to be open to the possibility that really what is helpful for her child is to have several go-to people. Right now, we're working on strengthening, her relationship with this child, and the parent in this case was making good progress. But I'm also seeing another real sort of strength here for this child, right? And the solution is an and, right, rather than an or solution. But part of the if I'm thinking of that example, part of what was very helpful was to be spending time trying to repair that relationship between the mother and the child, the mother and her mother, right? Rather than just sort of assuming that, yes, let's involve her mother in providing more support, and that would go smoothly. No, it had to be sort of handled, I think, very sensitively. But what we're wanting is to, essentially be using an attachment-based approach in all of those relationships, right? Does that make sense? And to then involve the grandmother in a very sort of structured and sort of organized way, so that it was supportive but not threatening for the mom.
Yes, I certainly think that makes a lot of sense. One of the approaches that I wonder if it would work is to actually put the onus on a grandmother to be supportive of her child forming that attachment relationship. So because she, in fact, has the power in that triadic relationship.
Right.
So if she can see herself having the power to influence the parent-child relationship, and then recognizing her own either desire to have that happen or not.
That's right.
Or not.
That's right. Yeah.
And coming to terms with that.
No, that's a very good point. Yeah, and because what we're wanting is to build relationships, right? Not create sort of problematic alliances that ultimately will be disruptive for the child. Yeah. So, and again, to help the parent, the grandparent, to see that the solution is an and solution, right? That so if the child has a strengthened relationship with his parent, but also a strong relationship with you, that's a win-win for that child, right? Rather than wanting a strong alliance with the grandmother. And yeah. But it's a that all of that work has to take place within the context of relationships, right? And takes time. Like I would say, thinking back to this family, that's coming to mind. That process probably took 6 months. To at least, that's right. But again, as the professional involved, I mean, I'm sort of hands-on multiple circles there, right? Hands-on all of those circles, right? And having a confident presence around this being a good solution for this child, right? For both of them to be the child's go-to people, right? Okay.
Okay, so we do have a few questions. The first question is, at what age can children continue to build new pathways in their brain? Is there an age limit?
Yeah, that's a good question. The neuroscientists have given us some good direction around this, right? Charlie Zena and others will they maintain, and I agree with them, that the brain never loses its capacity to form a secure attachment. It becomes more difficult over time. The brain's capacity to form a secure attachment, yes, narrows, but you actually never lose the capacity to do that. Really, attachment and the capacity to form a attachment is really sort of cradle to grave. I have a colleague in Calgary who a few years ago was doing attachment work with elderly adults who were in their 80s, wanting to help their children to form a secure attachment with them. So working with elderly adults and their children who were in their 50s and 60s, and was very successful. So it's really cradle to grave, and that's been my experience as well. Yeah, your brain really never loses that capacity.
Thank you. The next question, the last question today, is from Fort McMurray, and the question is dissociation issues. Could this lead to increased likelihood of alcohol or illicit drug use?
I would say that there isn't an absolutely sort of direct link between those two. I think that children with disorganized attachment, which this might be sort of pertaining to, are at risk for a number of mental health difficulties, and can be at increased risk for substance use. But I wouldn't say that there's you can draw sort of a direct sort of link between dissociation and that behavior. It's a more complex sort of constellation of challenges, but a good question.
Okay, thank you. Just quickly regarding some of the technical questions that were asked, number one being, can we get the slides online? Yes, you'll be able to get access to the slides online within about 2 weeks' time at the Government of Alberta FASD website, and it's fasd.alberta.ca/search.aspx. And the other question was about the confirmation email. not giving you a link to an evaluation, which it says you need to complete within 2 weeks to get your certification. So we will address this issue, and not to worry, we will send you the link.
Thank you, Nicole. And so it's my pleasure to thank Sonia for a really stimulating presentation and a nice lead into the next two presentations. Just reminding you to please fill out the evaluation form once you get it, and join us again on October the 15th when Dr. Vallette will discuss red flags and practical strategies regarding parent-child attachment relationships, and particularly under the FASD umbrella. Thank you.